In addition to the success of Dr. Seuss's own books, was the whole beginner's book project a success? I was just fascinated when I read the book. I imagined the Cat in the Hat visiting the Berenstain Bears. That connection, that would have been like, it was such a tight connection between the Berenstains and Theodor Geisel.
Yeah. You'd love to have the crossover of those characters, almost like DC and Marvel kind of characters.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Right. Was that project successful?
The project was very successful, and beginner books still exist today because they were that successful. Beginner books was an imprint with a motivation, and that motivation was to educate kids, to get them to read, to give them books they want to read. It was continuing the mission of the Cat in the Hat, the things that Ted had learned, that Dr. Seuss had learned in the Cat in the Hat. So those beginner books used those, first of all, what makes them legit, if you will, is they use those educator approved word lists. That's part of the strength of those books, and that's one of the reasons teachers have no problem handing them to children. They're using a tight vocabulary list that educators approve of. And you can't deviate from that list, and that was usually the hardest part of it. So after the Cat in the Hat came out and Seuss creates the beginner book imprint, he's writing books for beginner books, but more than anything, he's editing them and he's recruiting. One of his big tasks was to go out there and find great writers and artists for kids. And as you were saying, that's where the Berenstains came in. He saw the talent that Stan and Jan Berenstain had, and they loved working with him, even as he slightly terrified them. Because he did have that, really determined work ethic, and they tell a great story about, their first book for him, I think, was The Big Honey Hunt, and they tell the story about coming in to meet with him the very first day, and he had all their pages pinned up on the wall as he did to his own books, and just nitpicked them, just picked it apart. And they thought, oh my God, this is terrible. And he gets done just telling them everything that's wrong with it, and then says, "We got a great book going here. You should be really happy with this." So, and they had this conversation as they got on the train to go home, saying, does he even like us? And I think it was Jan who said, "You know what? The work is what really matters to him. I think that's what's most important to him," which was exactly right. And so that was sort of the driving force behind beginner books was Dr. Seuss, making sure those books followed the plot, had a plot, the Frank Capra method. Make sure you've got a story, make sure you're telling a story, giving them something interesting. And it did get to the point where they had a big sheaf of sort of rules they had for these books, which was don't show anything on the page that's not referenced in the text, for example. If a character's holding an apple and you don't have the word apple in the text, you can't draw the apple in there. You have to reference that in the text. So there was a lot of interrelationship between words and pictures, and that again was very important. That's the way the young brains interpret those words and the images. I mean, they're doing a lot of really heavy lifting. There's a lot of work going on in those books.